She wasn't supposed to be there. That's the thing nobody mentions when they tell this story later. Not the Foreign Office, not the Protocol Department, not the aide herself in the brief statement she gave 6 weeks after. They talk about the envelope. They talk about the register. They talk about what Harold Voss knew and when he knew it. Nobody talks about the rain. It was a Tuesday in November, and the cobblestones of Color Court at St. James's Palace were slick and dark and completely empty except for her. No tourists, no press, no ceremonial footfall. Just a young woman in a gray coat standing in the middle of one of the oldest working royal courtyards in London, holding a sealed envelope against her chest like it was the last warm thing in the world. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing that struck me. I should introduce myself. My name is Raymond Catchpole. I spent 31 years as a senior archivist at the palace system. Not one palace, the system, which means St. James's, which means Buckingham, which means the various other rooms and records offices and forgotten sub-corridors where the actual business of monarchy gets conducted quietly and without fuss. I was 3 weeks from my own retirement when this happened. Perhaps that's why it stayed with me. Perhaps people near the end of things notice other people near the end of things. I saw her from the window of the records annex. Second floor, north-facing, the kind of window that looks decorative from the outside and is actually the best vantage point in the building if you want to understand what the courtyard is doing on any given morning. She was alone. She was young. And the envelope she was holding, cream-colored, heavy stock, sealed with a wax impression I couldn't read from that distance. She wasn't reading it, wasn't opening it. She was just holding it. The way you hold something when someone has told you to get rid of it and you haven't yet decided whether you're going to obey. I watched her for about 40 seconds before she moved. She walked toward the guardsman at the north gate entrance. Not the ceremonial post, the working one. The one that most visitors don't notice because it doesn't come with a bearskin hat and a crowd of tourists pointing cameras. She walked toward it with the careful deliberateness of someone who has already rehearsed turning back 3 times and decided, finally, not to. The guard at that post was Sergeant Harold Voss. And what happened next is the reason I'm telling you this story, instead of 100 other ones I witnessed in 31 years of watching this institution operate. You need to understand what Harold Voss looked like before you can understand why everyone underestimated him. He was 61 years old. He had the posture of a man who had been standing at attention so long that relaxed and upright had become the same thing for him. His uniform was immaculate in the way that only decades of habit produces, not the careful immaculate of someone trying to impress, but the unconscious immaculate of someone for whom any other state would feel wrong. His face had the particular quality of long-service palace staff, composed, unreadable, present without being engaged. 3 days from retirement. That detail circulated in the way details circulate in institutions, not gossiped, exactly, just known. The way everyone knows when someone is leaving, the way a room subtly adjusts its weight around a person who is nearly gone. People had been saying goodbye to Harold Voss for approximately 3 weeks by this point. Quietly, respectfully, in the manner of people who genuinely liked someone and were also, if they were honest, already thinking of him in the past tense. He had become, without anyone intending it, slightly invisible. The palace equivalent of a piece of furniture that has been in the same corner for so long you stop seeing it even while you navigate around it every single day. This was a mistake. Harold Voss had served at St. James's for 22 of his 34 years. Before that, active postings. Before that, training that produced the kind of stillness most people spend entire careers trying to perform, and he had simply absorbed. His service record contained 3 commendations, one of which was classified in a way that nobody in the current administrative structure had thought to ask about. More importantly, and this is the part that mattered on that Tuesday morning, Harold Voss had spent 22 years in the one royal palace that everyone treated as secondary and nobody had bothered to fully understand. St. St. James's Palace, built by Henry VIII, the official royal residence, the court to which every foreign ambassador is still formally accredited, not Buckingham, not Kensington, not Windsor. St. James's, the court of St. James's. It says so on every diplomatic credential issued in this country, has said so for centuries, and almost nobody in the modern administrative apparatus had thought carefully about what that actually meant in procedural terms. Harold Voss had. He'd had 22 years of quiet shifts and good institutional memory, and a habit of reading old registers when the evenings were slow. He knew this building the way a man knows a house he has lived in alone for a long time, not just the rooms, but the rules of it, the written ones and the older ones underneath. He was standing at the north gate post when Nadia Osman walked across the wet cobblestones toward him, holding her envelope, having decided not to turn back. He watched her approach without expression, without surprise, without the slight adjustment of posture that most people make when something unexpected enters their line of sight. He simply waited. She stopped about 2 feet from him, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to retreat. She was 23 years old, I learned later, an administrative aide to the diplomatic mission of a small East African nation whose new ambassador had recently been appointed, and whose formal accreditation to the court of St. James's was, as of that morning, somewhere in a process it was never supposed to enter. She had dark eyes that were doing the thing frightened people's eyes do when they have decided to be brave, very still, very fixed, working hard to stay that way. She didn't offer a crumpled banknote. She didn't have that kind of certainty. Instead, she held up the envelope just slightly, not quite an offering, more like evidence. Sergeant Voss looked at it, then at her. "You're not a visitor," he said. His voice was the color of old wood, not warm, not cold, just solid. "No," she said. "You're not press." "No." A pause. The rain had thinned to something that wasn't quite rain anymore, just a persistent dampness in the air. "That envelope," he said, "it's addressed to the accreditation office." She blinked. She hadn't shown him the front of it. She was still holding it against her chest. "How did you?" Heavy cream stock wax seal, that particular shade of blue in the ribbon. Diplomatic correspondence, formal grade. Should have arrived 3 days ago through the registrar's intake. He paused. Didn't. Nadia Osman stared at him for a moment. Then something shifted in her face. Not relief exactly, but the particular expression of someone who has been carrying something alone for long enough that even the possibility of being understood feels like setting down weight. "I was told to dispose of it," she said. Voss said nothing. He waited. "I was told it was a duplicate, that the primary had already been processed, that keeping this one would create a procedural conflict." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "I don't think it's a duplicate." Voss looked at the envelope again. Then he did something small and significant. He held out his hand. Not demanding, not reaching, just open. Nadia looked at the hand, then at the gate behind him, then back at the hand. "I don't know who to trust," she said quietly. "That's sensible," Voss replied. He didn't lower his hand. She gave him the envelope. He didn't open it. He held it the same way she had, careful, considered, like something that mattered. Then he looked at her directly for the first time. "Tell me what you saw," he said. "Start from before the envelope." She had been in the wrong meeting. That was how it started. Not deliberately. She'd been sent to collect a briefing folder from a conference room on the 3rd floor of the administrative block, and had arrived 4 minutes early to find the room not empty as scheduled but occupied. The door slightly ajar, 2 men at the far table with documents spread between them, and a third person standing at the window with his back turned. She had stopped in the doorway, had been about to apologize and retreat, but one of the men at the table had said something that fixed her feet to the floor. He had said, "If it goes through St. James's intake, we can't touch it." She told Voss this in the careful, slightly rushed way people recount things they've been turning over in their minds for days. Not dramatic, just precise. The way you speak when you're trying to make sure the words come out exactly as they happened. Voss listened without interrupting. His eyes moved once to the courtyard entrance behind her, then back. The man at the table had continued. She'd heard him say that the routing needed to happen before end of business Wednesday, that if the document was logged at St. James's under primary intake, it would trigger the 1952 standing review requirement, and they didn't want that particular mechanism activated. The man at the window had turned at that point, and she had recognized him. Edmund Hale, Chief of Protocol, a face she knew from departmental briefings and the particular careful way everyone in the building adjusted their tone when he entered a room. Hale had said only one thing in response: make sure the girl in the blue office doesn't keep her copy. She was the girl in the blue office. Did they see you? Voss asked. I don't think so. The door was nearly closed. I was only there for, she stopped, maybe 30 seconds. Voss nodded once. The envelope, when did you receive it? Yesterday afternoon. Inter-office delivery, standard routing slip, my name on it. It had been opened. She paused. Resealed badly. Someone had looked inside. But not removed what was inside. No. Voss was quiet for a moment. The courtyard remained empty. Somewhere beyond the arch, a car passed on the street, muffled and distant. What time is it now? He asked, though there was a clock visible from where he stood. 9:20, Nadia said. He nodded slowly. The accreditation office opened formal intake at 10:38. It wasn't much of a window, but it was a window. Stay here, he said, then seeing her expression. Not a command, a request. You can leave whenever you want, but if you leave this, he held up the envelope slightly, goes nowhere useful. Nadia stayed. And that was the moment, I think, watching from my window, not yet knowing the full shape of what I was seeing, that the morning stopped being an ordinary Tuesday. Because from the far side of the courtyard arch, moving quickly and trying not to look like they were moving quickly, came two people in the gray administrative lanyards of the protocol department. They were in their 30s, both of them. The kind of administrative competence that fills large institutions, not malicious, not particularly thoughtful, just pointed in a direction and moving. The first one, a man with a neat side parting, had his tablet already open. The second, a woman in low heels, was doing the particular walk of someone who has been told to look calm and is concentrating on it too hard. They came through the arch and slowed when they saw Nadia standing at the gate post, a fraction of hesitation. Then both faces rearranged into the expression of helpful concern. Nadia, the man said it like they were colleagues who happened to be passing. There you are. We've been looking. We thought you might have gotten turned around. The briefing's been moved to 10:30. Nadia said nothing. She glanced at Voss. Voss had not moved, had not adjusted his stance, had not done anything that could be described in any report as confrontational. He was simply still present in the way of a load-bearing wall. Morning, he said pleasantly. The man with the tablet smiled back. Morning, we're just collecting our colleague. She had an early appointment that's been rescheduled. He looked at Nadia. Ready. She's at a gatehouse post, Voss said. I'll need your access authorization for St. James's operational grounds before anyone moves. A brief pause. The woman in low heels spoke. We both have palace-wide clearance. Palace-wide covers Buckingham operational zones, the residential corridors and the state room administrative block, Voss said. St. James's operational grounds require a secondary site-specific authorization issued by the St. James's duty superintendent. He paused. Do you have that? They didn't. It was visible in the half-second before the man with the tablet recovered his expression. I don't think that's a standard requirement for. It's in the St. James's Site Operational Manual, Section 4, Paragraph 9. The manual is available in the administrative library. It hasn't changed since 2003. Voss looked at the tablet. I can wait while you check. The woman tried a different approach. She looked past Voss at Nadia directly. Nadia, we just need to sort out the paperwork issue with the envelope. It's a simple clerical thing. Come with us and we'll have it resolved before 10. From behind Voss quietly, I'd rather stay here. Voss's expression didn't change. You've heard the young lady. You're welcome to submit a formal request for her attendance through the St. James's Duty Superintendent's office. That's room 14 across the court, opens at 9:30. The man with the tablet took one step forward. Not aggressive, the administrative equivalent of pressing a button a second time because the first press didn't work. Sergeant, this really doesn't need to be complicated. We're all on the same side here. Voss looked at him with the patient attention of someone who has heard that sentence before and knows precisely what it means. Authorization, he said, or room 14. They stopped. They looked at each other. The calculation happening behind their faces was almost audible. Push further and create a documented scene, or withdraw and make a call. They chose the call. The man with the tablet said something about following up through proper channels, which is what people say when they're retreating and don't want to use the word retreat, and then they walked back through the arch at the same too-controlled pace they had arrived with. Nadia exhaled. They'll come back, she said. Yes, said Voss. With someone bigger, that's fine. He said it the way a man says something is fine when he means he has already accounted for it. With the courtyard empty again, Voss turned back to her. Finish what you were telling me, he said. The man at the window, Hale, what was the rest of it? Nadia pulled her coat tighter. The dampness in the air had not improved. The envelope, she explained, contained the formal letter of credence for Ambassador Daniel Ape, newly appointed by his government, submitted for accreditation to the Court of St. James's. It was the original, not a duplicate, not a copy. The formal diplomatic submission that, once logged and processed by the accreditation office at St. James's, would constitute official recognition of the ambassador's posting in the United Kingdom. Voss listened without expression. The problem, as Nadia had pieced it together from what she'd overheard, and what she'd quietly looked up afterward in sources she'd had to find herself because nobody had offered them, was this. Ambassador Ape's nation had recently finalized a trade agreement that cut across the interests of a private consortium, with very specific connections to people in very specific positions. An ambassador who was officially, procedurally, formally recognized and credentialed, had protections and standing that an ambassador whose paperwork was still technically in process did not. If the letter of credence was rerouted to Buckingham's administrative intake instead of St. James's accreditation office, it would enter a processing queue that moved slowly, required additional sign-offs from departments currently understaffed, and could be delayed for months without anyone doing anything technically illegal. By which time certain agreements would be concluded, certain positions would be filled, and a formally recognized ambassador raising formal objections would be considerably less useful than he might have been at the start. They didn't need to destroy the letter, Nadia said. They just needed it to go to the wrong place. Voss was quiet. I looked up the routing, she continued. Buckingham's administrative office handles accreditation inquiries, but St. James's handles accreditation completions. That's the distinction. Most people don't know there's a distinction. Voss knew there was a distinction. He had known for 22 years, but he let her finish. If this goes through Buckingham intake today, it gets logged as an inquiry rather than a completion. It needs secondary approval from a committee that meets quarterly, and the next meeting is February. She stopped. It's November. She reached into her coat pocket, held out a photograph, printed on plain paper, the kind produced by an office copier, slightly warm at the edges. It was a routing slip, the kind attached to interoffice envelopes. This one had 2 entries, the original destination typed in the standard format, St. James's Palace, Accreditation Office. Primary intake, and below it in handwritten ink, a single line redirecting it to Buckingham Palace Administrative Processing, Ref. Secondary Inquiry. The handwriting, she said, belonged to Edmund Hale. She had found the routing slip in the recycling tray outside the blue office. The one nobody had thought to check, because people who want documents destroyed assume destroyed means gone, not folded in a coat pocket by a 23-year-old aide who had decided, somewhere between the recycling tray and color court, not to be the kind of person who looks away. Voss took the photograph, held it alongside the envelope, said nothing for a moment. Then he reached into the inner breast pocket of his uniform jacket and produced something that Nadia, and, frankly, almost everyone else in that building, had never seen outside of a glass display case. A key, old brass, long-barreled, attached to a chain that connected to a ring bearing the St. James's duty sergeant's mark. "Come with me," he said. Phase 7, Confrontation 2, Edmund Hale. He took her to the records anteroom off the color court ground passage, not the main archive, just the duty sergeant's reference room, which contained, among other things, a shelf of bound operational registers dating from 1921 to the present, and a telephone that still worked on the internal palace exchange. He found the register he wanted without looking at the spines. Third from the left, second shelf. Dark green leather, gold embossed year, 1952. He set it on the table. He did not open it yet. Then he picked up the telephone and made 2 calls. The first was short, 4 sentences, the last of which was St. James's operational grounds, witness disclosure, envelope in custody. The second was slightly longer and ended with him saying yes twice and hanging up. Nadia watched him. "Who did you call?" "The duty superintendent," he said, "and the accreditation office duty registrar." He looked at the register. When Hale comes, and he will come himself this time, he'll have documentation. He'll have an explanatory framework. He'll have the particular kind of confidence that comes from spending years in a building and believing you understand all of it. He tapped the cover of the 1952 register. He doesn't understand all of it. Edmund Hale arrived 11 minutes later. He came alone, which told Voss something. No aides, no junior officers, no protective cushion of administrative staff. Just Hale himself, tall, silver-haired, wearing the particular expression of a senior official who has decided that the most effective tool available to him is the absolute unshakable certainty that everything is already resolved. He walked into the records anteroom and looked at the scene, Voss behind the table, register closed in front of him, Nadia standing to the side, envelope and photograph on the table surface, and he smiled. Not warmly, efficiently. "Harold," he said, first name, deliberate, the social equivalent of putting a hand on someone's shoulder. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Mr. Hale," Voss said. "The young lady has had a difficult morning. She received some correspondence that wasn't correctly labeled, and she's understandably confused about the routing. We're simply here to collect it and ensure it gets to the right place." He glanced at Nadia with the patient benevolence of someone who has already decided she doesn't matter. No harm done. "The envelope is in custody pending accreditation office intake," Voss said. Hale's smile adjusted slightly. "Harold, you're 3 days from retirement. This isn't your lane." "It is while I'm on post." A pause. Hale set a folder on the table. "I have documentation showing this correspondence was incorrectly submitted and requires rerouting to Buckingham administrative intake for proper processing. It's a clerical matter." Voss looked at the folder, did not touch it. The letter is a letter of credence for a formally appointed ambassador. Under the standing accreditation protocol, that class of document must be received and logged at the primary accreditation court. which is a matter of administrative interpretation. Which is a matter of royal proclamation, Voss said. The room went quiet. Hale looked at him. For the first time, the efficient smile had something under it that was not quite certainty. Voss opened the 1952 register. He had dog-eared the page. I know that now. I found it myself, 6 months later, while cataloging. But in that room, in that moment, he turned to it with the ease of a man who has visited the same passage so many times he could find it in the dark. He read aloud. Not performatively, not theatrically, in the flat, precise voice of someone reading an operational document into the record. By royal proclamation, November 1952, all primary instruments of diplomatic accreditation presented to the Court of St. James's shall be received, witnessed, and registered by the duty officer of St. James's Palace prior to any secondary administrative processing. No instrument of accreditation shall be valid or actionable until so registered. Any rerouting of a primary instrument prior to St. James's registration constitutes a breach of accreditation protocol and renders subsequent processing void. He closed the register. The proclamation was issued in November 1952, he said. It was never repealed, it was never superseded, it was never digitized. He looked at Hale directly. It has been sitting on this shelf for 72 years. Hale stared at him. The routing slip bearing your handwriting, Voss continued, redirecting this primary instrument to Buckingham intake prior to St. James's registration, constitutes a documented breach of that proclamation. I have a witness. I have the physical document. And I have, as of 9 minutes ago, a duty superintendent and an accreditation office registrar who have been notified that a primary instrument is in custody and awaiting intake. He placed his hand flat on the register, not aggressive, just present. You're welcome to dispute the proclamation's current applicability, he said. That would be a matter for the Lord Chamberlain's office. Would you like me to put that call through? The Foreign Office liaison arrived at 23 minutes past 10. His name was Geoffrey Marsh, and he had the look of a man who had been dispatched to perform a simple administrative retrieval, and was now standing in a records anteroom looking at a 72-year-old royal proclamation and reconsidering the shape of his mourning. He had, when he arrived, a prepared posture, the diplomatic equivalent of Hale's efficient smile, the demeanor of institutional authority arriving to settle something that smaller people had unnecessarily complicated. He looked at Voss. He looked at Hale, who had not left but had also not spoken again. He looked at Nadia, who had remained exactly where she was. He said, I'm sure we can resolve this without. Sergeant Voss, Voss said. 34 years of service, St. James's operational post, primary custody of a diplomatic instrument under the 1952 proclamation. He said it not as an introduction, but as a statement of record, as if he were speaking into a microphone that was already running. Marsh paused. The 1952 proclamation is in the register on the table. I've read it into witness record this morning. The duty superintendent has a copy of my log. Voss looked at Marsh carefully. Are you here to instruct me to breach it? A long pause. The thing about institutions, the thing I have spent 31 years watching from records rooms and archival annexes and second-floor windows, is that they run on the assumption that the people inside them know the rules. Not all the rules, nobody knows all the rules, but enough of them. The working rules, the current ones, the digitized, circulated, briefed, and practiced ones. What they are almost never prepared for is someone who knows a rule they forgot existed. Marsh looked at the register. He was, I could see even from the doorway where I had arrived by this point, drawn downstairs by the superintendent's alert, standing just at the threshold, doing the rapid calculation of a man who needs to know whether this rule was real before he decides how to proceed. He asked to see the proclamation himself. Voss turned the register around on the table. Marsh read it, once, then again. His expression when he looked up had changed into something flatter and more careful. "The envelope needs to be logged at St. James's accreditation intake," he said. He was not saying it to Voss. He was saying it in a tone that suggested he was now saying it for the record himself. "Yes," said Voss. Marsh looked at Hale. Hale said nothing. "The routing slip," Marsh said. "Is that?" He gestured at the photograph on the table. "Yes," said Voss. Another silence. Marsh made a call on his mobile, stepped just outside the door. Spoke for approximately 45 seconds, returned. His prepared posture was entirely gone. "The envelope will be processed through St. James's primary intake," he said. "This morning." He looked at Hale with the careful neutrality of a man building distance. "I'll need a full account of the routing decision by end of day." Hale, for the first time, said nothing at all. The accreditation office registrar arrived 12 minutes later. The envelope was opened in the anteroom, in the presence of Voss, Marsh, the registrar, and Nadia Osman, whose name went into the log as the delivering party. The letter of credence for Ambassador Daniel Ake was formally received, witnessed, and registered at St. James's Palace at 10:47 in the morning. Primary intake complete. Edmund Hale left the building before noon. He was, as of 3 weeks later, on an extended administrative leave that nobody in the building discussed directly, and everyone understood completely. Phase 9, Resolution. The notification reached the ambassador's mission at 11:30. I know this because Nadia told me later. We spoke twice in the weeks after. The way people speak when they have been in the same building during the same storm and need to account for it to themselves. She said the ambassador had been sitting in his temporary offices with the particular stillness of someone waiting for news he has already half accepted will not come. His aide, Nadia, had called from St. James's to tell him the letter had been registered, that his accreditation was complete, that he was, officially, formally, and unambiguously, the recognized ambassador of his nation to the court of St. James's. He had asked her to repeat it. She had. He didn't say anything else for a moment. Then he said, "Who registered it?" She had said, "A guard, a sergeant. He's been there for 34 years. The ambassador had been quiet again. Then, "Tell him thank you from me." She had said she would. The accreditation register was updated. The routing irregularity was flagged in the formal administrative review that Marsh's call had triggered. The Foreign Office inquiry that followed was not publicized. These things rarely are, but its findings were circulated internally, and a number of access authorizations were reviewed, revised, and in 2 cases permanently revoked. The 1952 proclamation was, for the first time in decades, added to the Digital Operational Reference System. Nobody announced this. It simply appeared one morning in the shared administrative directory, quietly filed understanding Royal Instruments, active. The way things appear in institutions when someone needs them not to appear to have been forgotten. Voss was on his second-to-last shift when the update went live. I don't know if he saw it. I didn't ask. Phase 10, Emotional Landing. His last shift was a Friday. There was no ceremony. This isn't that kind of building, mostly not for departures. There was a brief acknowledgement at the morning briefing, the kind where a senior officer says a few sentences and everyone nods, and then the briefing continues. A card was passed around the week before. His locker was cleared by Thursday. On Friday morning, he stood his post at the north gate for the last time. Nadia came at 9:15. She wasn't in her gray coat this time. Different coat, darker, a bag over one shoulder, the expression of someone who has recently made a number of decisions and is at peace with all of them. She had, she told me later, submitted a formal personal account of the events of that Tuesday to the Administrative Review Board, on her own initiative, without being asked. The kind of thing that takes a particular quality of quiet courage to do inside an institution, that has the capacity to be very cold to people who make its difficulties visible. She crossed the cobblestones of Color Court without hesitating. Voss watched her approach. He waited. She stopped in front of him. She didn't have anything to give him except one thing, and she reached into her coat pocket and held it out. It was a torn corner of cream-colored paper. The edge of the envelope seal, the wax impression, cracked along one side, with part of the ribbon still attached. She had kept it from when she'd first received the envelope, pulled free when she was sitting alone the night before that Tuesday deciding whether she was going to do anything at all. She placed it in his hand. "You should have something from it," she said. Voss looked at the seal, then at her. "Ambassador Ake presents his credentials to the court next Thursday," she said. "I thought you'd want to know." He nodded. She said, "I don't know why you didn't just tell me about the proclamation when I first came to you. You clearly already knew." Voss was quiet for a moment. "Because it mattered that you came," he said. "The proclamation was there either way. What it needed was someone to walk across the courtyard and not turn back." Nadia looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once and walked away across the cobblestones, her footsteps clear and even on the wet stone. Voss closed his hand around the seal, slipped it into his breast pocket. He stood at his post for the remaining 4 hours and 17 minutes of his last shift. He did not look at the clock, as far as I could see from the window. He did not do anything differently from any other shift. At 2 o'clock, when his relief arrived, he exchanged the standard handover, signed the log, collected his cap from the post box. He walked out through the north gate arch, across the pavement, and he didn't look back at the building, not once, which I found I couldn't entirely bear to watch, and so I turned back to the window and looked at the empty courtyard instead. The cobblestones were dry by then. The morning's rain had been gone for hours. Phase 11, Outro. I found the dog-eared page 6 months later. I was cataloging the 1952 register as part of a broader archival review, the kind that institutions conduct after incidents to demonstrate that things have been properly accounted for. Most of the register was routine. Duty logs, operational notes, the particular administrative texture of a building mid-century. But one page had its corner turned down. Old fold, deep crease, the kind that comes from being turned and turned again over years and years until the paper remembers the shape. The 1952 proclamation. He'd known it was there. I think he'd probably known since the late 1990s, since the years of quiet evening shifts and old registers, and the habit of reading what other people had stopped thinking about. I think he'd turned that page down and turned it back and turned it down again, over 2 decades, waiting with the patience of someone who understands that knowing a thing and needing a thing are different problems, and that the second one cannot be forced. He was 61 years old, and 3 days from retirement, when a 23-year-old woman walked across the wet cobblestones and handed him the second problem. And he held the line, not with a weapon, not with force, with 34 years of paying attention to a building that everyone treated as the secondary one, in a system where everyone was always looking at the bigger palace down the road. He knew where the authority actually lived. He just waited for the morning it mattered. What would you have done, standing at that gate with 3 days left on the clock? Would you have held the envelope? Would you have opened the register? Or would you have let it be someone else's problem, someone newer, someone whose retirement wasn't already visible on the horizon? Drop your answer in the comments. Because this story isn't about a royal proclamation that nobody digitized. It's about a man who read the old pages when nobody was watching, and was ready when the morning finally came. Stay sharp, stay curious, and never mistake a quiet corridor for an empty one.